portion of the meeting to order, and I think we'll just move right into the agenda. The first item is comments from the public on items not on the agenda. So if you have a comment, please identify yourself. If you're new to this portion of the meeting, I'd like to have you understand you have to listen to your comment. If board members have clarifying questions, they will ask those, and if for responses required, it will come at the next board meeting. So, you have to, okay, welcome.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me, or do I?
You're
okay.
Sound good.
My name is Katie Bowden, and I'd like to read a brief statement that I have for you all, if that's okay. I have 3 children in the district at Summit and Essex Middle School, and I'm here tonight because I'm very concerned by the level and number of situations and issues I have witnessed or personally experienced this year alone related to equity in the district. I know there has been a lot of discussion and time spent talking about transportation, and with very good reason, but it has become increasingly concerning to experience such serious challenges and issues in both schools for all 3 of my children. The district really, I encourage the district really to look into discussing and clarifying some of the concerns in the district about the lack of inclusion and equity in the buildings, between the buildings, and for all students, regardless of their needs, address, or popularity. I've watched almost every meeting online, and I'm concerned that there hasn't been acknowledgement for what I would and will passionately advocate are serious concerns around equity and inclusion in general education, but also potential violations of special education law, regulations, and also federal law. At some point, whether you violate the laws intentionally or due to some type of incompetence, it's still violating the law and needs to be addressed so it doesn't keep happening for students. The disconnect I've felt and experienced from all levels of the staff and administration within both of my son's IEP teams at Summit and Essex Middle School is concerning, and it only allows for more inequity to happen. This needs to be addressed and discussed as transparently as transportation has been, because the board will ultimately be held accountable for ensuring all laws are properly followed and implemented. Lastly, I know I've addressed this directly with Beth, but I also want to share, I think the board needs to hear that there should be some serious concerns that there are a number of students that were told they could not participate in the Odyssey of the Mind program at Essex Middle School this year due to there not being enough interest and no teams competing. Yet this weekend, there were clearly 2 registered teams listed that would potentially have been possible for some of those students, including my children, under the Founders Memorial School and Essex Middle School memberships, and they were also paid for somehow for the schools. So I just wanted to share with you that concern, because I know it wasn't just my kids, and there were other children that are going to hear that the people that they were trusting to give them that information, whether they knew or didn't have it, didn't have the right information. And there were 2 teams that competed, one of whom did amazing and did actually get to go to work. They're going to go to World and won a trophy and should be celebrated. I just don't think, I think there are kids that may need support in understanding how that was allowed to happen. Thank you all for your time and dedication this year. It is clear how passionate you are, and I really appreciate all of the work you do for all of our families. Thank you.
Are there any clarifying questions from board members?
Okay, if you could, since you mentioned specifically the IEP, concerns that you have with it. Would it be possible for you to give maybe a specific example, just something so that we would know what challenges it is that you're facing and where you believe there's problems with working with your IEP team?
Sure. Per IEP, special education regulations and safeguards for parents especially, it is required that everybody have a free and appropriate public education, which means that they are able to access their general classroom and the instruction there, as well as their related services. My son has had significant struggles that we have been addressing at Summit. He's in kindergarten, and I'm concerned that there has not been adequate interventions that would allow him an opportunity to make adequate educational gains, which I don't know if that's clarified enough, but that is definitely a big concern for an IEP.
Other clarifying questions? Okay, thank you very much for coming. We will certainly keep your thoughts in mind as we discuss these various issues. Anyone else have something under public to be heard? Okay, let's move on to consent agenda. Does anyone want to pull anything from the consent agenda? If not, Martha, do you want to make the motion?
I move that we approve the consent agenda with the following items: school board meeting minutes of March 6, 2019, approve warrants, and professional appointment of Clara Ripley, a mathematics teacher for EMS.
And wasn't there a second?
Yes.
I think it's
Matthew Saraka.
Matthew Saraka.
ADL English teacher replacing just.
Oh, I didn't have that.
Oh, okay, what's in her things? So the second appointment is Matthew Saraka.
ADL English teacher replacing someone who's retiring.
Right.
And he had no typos in his entire package. That's awesome.
English teacher.
It was quite an impressive one.
That's an English teacher.
Now, maybe.
Okay, so all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Thanks. Okay, so our learning information update tonight is on, oh no, sorry, first we're going to do the audited financial statements. Brian, do you
Yeah, so
use this?
this marks actually the first audit that was conducted in the Essex Westford School District, and gives us a good chance to sort of come out of the gate kind of doing some of the high-end due diligence that I think is good practice for the board. So I've invited our the senior accountant on the job from our auditors. Tyler Kimberly is here. You have had the material for some time.
Mm-hmm.
What I'll do is ask Tyler to give just a thumbnail sketch of what the process was, where the findings are, some highlights, and then see what the board has for questions.
Hello everyone, I'm Tyler, one of the accountants or auditors who worked on the Essex Westford School audit. And Brian, like you said, just wanted a brief run through everything. You should have two documents in your hands. One is a short few-page governance letter, we like to call, and that kind of highlights key things that came up during the audit. And I'm just going to quickly go through that and mention a few things in the financial statement report that you also have. The audit actually stretched a little longer than usual, just due to all of the stuff coming in and then getting combined for reporting purposes. Normally it would have been done a little earlier in the year, but that's the reason for a delay on that. We started the audit in November. It really went up until the beginning of February, once everything was just kind of squared away in reconciliation for complete. There was a new accounting standard that the Essex Westford Union School District adopted in the fiscal year 18 audit that we did here, and it has to relate to other post-employment benefits offered by the Vermont State Teachers Retirement System. So that is one change that you will see just in the overall report format from prior years. And there weren't too many audit adjustments that we proposed. Management gave us 14 audit adjustments, and we proposed 8. And those 8 audit adjustments really had to do with adjusting a few long-term liabilities, capital asset amounts, and various pension amounts. We did not actually have any audit findings as a result of the procedures performed. Essex Westford has a good system in place of controls and separating key functions, so that obviously helps put safeguards into place. That does it with this governance letter, and the last document is the financial statements and independent auditors reports. You'll see on pages 1 and 2 a standard independent auditors report, and that report simply gives a clean opinion in that the financial statements presented herein and the notes represent fairly in accordance with reporting principles put out by the GASB, Governmental Accounting Standards Board. And Essex Westford does receive a lot of federal funding in excess of $750,000 for fiscal year 18, so they had a single audit. So that you will see reports down in pages 51 through 54, various compliance reports that we put out, and we didn't note any deficiencies in internal control or compliance. So that's a very brief overview. If anybody wants to ask questions, or I can go into more detail too, so just let me know.
Thank you. I think we should start off by saying congratulations to Brian and his team for a clean set of audits. It's impressive, especially when we did a pretty challenging exercise in bringing 2 central offices together. Probably the only place in the state that this had to happen. So it's impressive. Now I'll open it up for questions from the board. Diane.
On page 14, can you tell me what is included in the special revenue fund? That was the one I could not find a definition for. All the others seem to be defined. That was the one that was.
Yep, I'm just flipping over to the page to refer to. Bear with me. If you look on page 34, you will see a highlight in note 1C of the various funds, the governmental funds. You'll see a description of the general fund, the tech center operating fund, capital projects fund, and then you'll see one for the special revenue fund. Pretty much what that fund is showing are just, amounts. It could be grant money coming from specific sources that are either voter committed or restricted through an outside source like the state or a grantor, something like that. That would be tracked in that fund.
So this is, a lot of times a special revenue fund will be, it may be anticipated, but a certain amount may not be known, and it would be working on a reimbursement, a restricted basis of what it could be spent on. So, and also some special revenue funds, the state allows carryover for it to continue to go into future years up to a certain percent. So the special revenues fund works in an ability to carry over plus be able to match revenues and expenses, where in the operating fund we may not have that precision of knowing exactly what the allocation is. Just for instance, like a Title I award could vary in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, where a best grant may vary in $5,000 to $7,000. But the Special Revenues Fund is a place where we would treat those restricted dollars.
So that might be like Carl Perkins or something?
In the CTE side, it could work that way. There's a carryover at Carl Perkins, which I believe you can do up to 10% carryover. But I think a lot of it is actually Amy Cole's dollars that are her programming dollars for different title grants. Yep.
Other board questions?
I think the audited financial statement gives you a very comprehensive view of the resources and assets that you're responsible for as a board. It provides some light on things that we don't normally talk about very often, such as that we maintain a dental program and we self-insure, and therefore we have future liabilities and past service liabilities to that. It talks about and breaks out our enterprise funds and our governmental funds. So I think it's a good way. I think it's important for us to continue to adjust our management information so that it's reflective of the audit, and then also continue to improve the reporting of our audit so that it has the, has the right information. This is really unique. In fact, it's only because we're in our first year of existence that we don't have a material weakness, because we're not reporting comparative data, which would be a GASB 34 requirement, but we have no comparative data.
Okay.
But in future years, you'll see the whole MD&A will be a compare and contrast between the 2 years, the prior one and the one that's just being audited. And the MD&A, the management discussion and analysis, really is, it is a, if we invest in it, it can be incredibly valuable at creating a sort of a narrated story of our financial health and activities.
Yeah. So I also want to say I appreciated the article you sent us. I felt like those questions were answered as I read the letter and the audit itself, but I appreciate it. I've always felt like I needed a course in what should I look for when I read an audit, because I serve on a few boards where I look at them, and I know enough to read the management level letter, and I know what to look for there, but I'm always a little stymied as to what else I should be looking for. So I like that article.
Great.
Thank you. Anything else? Thank you very much for coming. We appreciate having you here. We'll see how things go next year. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, now it's time to talk about data. This is something we've been waiting for. So, Amy.
Over here.
We need to make a motion to accept
Oh,
the.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, so Kim makes a motion to accept the audited financial reports. Is that right terminology? Anyone have any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. Thanks, Brian, for reminding us of that. I'm clearly eager to get this part of the agenda. So, Amy, I'll turn it over to you. Pardon? I think there won't be any problem in using up your time and more.
So I'm Amy Cole, I'm the Director of Curriculum. And it's my understanding that you wanted to have another night to look at some assessment data. I was here earlier in the fall. And so, whenever that request comes through, I try to imagine what it is that you want. So I worked with Beth to try to figure out what data, because there's so much data, right? And we made the agreement tonight to focus on 2 of the measurable outcomes that are in your continuous improvement plan as a starter. And as always, invite me back. I'm happy to put more graphs in front of you and answer any questions that you have. And because we have audience members, I assume that any questions from the board or audience will go through Martha, and we'll record them, and you can stump me. And I remember your question, Patrick, and I have the answer to it.
Wait,
From the fall.
I've asked a lot of questions.
I know, I'll remind you what the question was.
From last.
Okay, I just clicked this way, is that right? Look at that. Okay, so this is just a reminder of your continuous improvement plan measurable outcomes. The 8 statements, and what tonight we're going to focus on are those 2, and really what's been interesting is working as a leadership team, wrapping our head around these 8 statements and trying to have a conversation about, well, now that we said these and we said that these are valuable. I'm so sorry you guys have your back turned. Is that all right?
No,
You can see what you're saying?
we've got this paper down.
You know, how is it that we would measure these things? And these 2 that are colored are actually just a little bit easier to measure than some of the other ones. But as we really started to dig in, we started to ask ourselves, well, what do we exactly mean by those sentences? And it's really been a good exercise for the leadership team to go through. So we've been, a few weeks ago, we did a data protocol where we took each of these 2 sentences and I put some data in front of them from our most recent assessments in the winter, and they had time to go through them and work as K-12 teams in small groups to kind of dig in. Well, what does this data tell us and what questions come up for us? We explored a little bit the idea of doing it with you guys because it was an enjoyable exercise to go through. Typically when you do data protocols, you have some ahas, but mostly you leave with more questions. So what does that mean? So I'll share with you some of those kind of ahas and those questions that came up in that meeting and let you know that we're going to continue doing that work. But I'll share with you some of the data that they looked at. And just a reminder, as a new district, we made the decision to maintain for year 1, we're in year 2, right? So year 1, we maintained separate curriculums, separate assessment systems, separate data systems. So really this is our first year of implementing a common assessment plan and a common data system. So there's some data points we can talk about that are still fresh to us. They're new common assessments that we do together that next year we'll have a greater longevity looking at that data over time. So the first one we'll look at is every student will read on grade level by the end of grade 3. This is the first year that all of our 3rd grade students took the same assessment. All of our students, whether they be from the former Essex Town or Chittenden Central, did do reading assessments, but they were 2 different assessments. Essex Town did DRA, the former CCSU did F&P. We had a committee together, we made the decision to implement the F&P running record this year. So we did that for K through 5, uniform across the district in the fall. What I'm going to share with you is what that local assessment data looks like, but I'm also going to share with you, we also rolled out this year for the first time a common progress report, K through 5. So we were able to look at how did the teachers record that the students were doing in reading holistically, not just that assessment point. And we kind of put them together to look at that. So colorful graph number 1. This year, our 3rd grade crew, we actually had some fairly low scores. We had only 49% of our 3rd grade students were meeting the benchmark on the most recent assessment in the winter. That is a one-on-one rating assessment. A couple things that came up in our conversation as a leadership team, like why? 49%, that's fairly low because in the past we've seen numbers closer to 60, 70, sometimes 80%. We also looked at that 3rd grade group and looked at how they did in 2nd grade, and they scored higher at the end of 2nd grade than they were scoring in the fall. So we're starting to explore, and I'll talk a little bit later about what kind of summer regression occurred with this particular group. Is it occurring with all grade levels? Is it this particular group? Well, this particular group saw a tremendous drop from spring to fall. Some other dynamics that were going on. I just said that we all did the new assessment for the first time. That means a whole lot of teachers were giving a new assessment for the first time this year. We put a lot of training in place for that, but what that requires is a lot of calibration. So every student was assessed one-on-one. Your assessment of their reading might be slightly different than yours, and it requires a lot of professional learning and time to collaborate to make sure that you're scoring in the same way. So that's one area that we've identified that we want to continue to work on. Another area is the fact that we adopted a new set of benchmarks. So the benchmarks that we use are from Columbia University Teachers College Readers and Writers Workshop, and they just changed their benchmarks. That was new for some of our teachers to experience what that is. And for those of you who have kids at home, you might know that what that means is that, actually I think this slide may be helpful, our students are part of a guided reading program where we determine their independent and instructional level, and it's rated on a letter system. So what we can do is support families and support students in moving up the letters. So if they're, say for example, a K in the fall, we might want to see them as an M in the winter. And so those benchmarks were bumped up just a little bit in some of our grade levels, and that was new for our teachers. So when we think about that statement, go back to that statement, every student will read on grade level. With this one particular data point, we're looking at about a 50% for this particular cohort. So we dug in and started to figure out, or tried to ask the question, well, what does that mean? Who are the students that are not meeting benchmarks? What was their second grade experience like? Are there particular profiles? And those are the things that the leadership team is looking at right now. You can see also in this graph, and I included K through 5 in particular, this is this year's group. This third grade group in particular scored lower than the other grade spans in terms of the numbers of students meeting benchmarks. So what does that mean? Is it a particular cohort?
Amy, is that a new slide that you put in before I
think I put it should be the same slide, but I had neglected to put the name of the assessment on it, so I cleaned it up.
It might look a little different. I uploaded it to the site and she made changes.
You did. Yesterday I noticed that I could have improved upon
darn.
some of the titles of the graphs and make them bigger. So you have,
it might look a
we'll
little
get you a
different.
prettier one. The numbers shouldn't have changed. This again is an image of what our third grade looks like, and this is really helpful when our principals look at this. They say, this is our third grade readers, and it shows you the range of independent reading levels that we experience across the district. This is about 300 kids. And the circle is where they should be right now. So that's their guided reading level benchmark. So then we started looking at progress report data. And what we found was that as the teachers reported out on progress report, we have 3 reading standards. One of them is reading fundamental, and that means the basics of reading. So we grabbed that standard and said, how are our teachers reporting out on that? And there are multiple data points that contribute to that, not just that F&P running record. And what we found is that teachers are reporting out that 61% of our students were evaluated this winter as secure or expanding on the progress report. I looked a little bit more deeply at that, and it looks as if they have varied by grade level cohort. In other words, the third grade did score lower than the other grade spans, which sort of mirrors what we found in their assessment results. But I also looked across schools to see, because often teachers get together and work on progress reports, but not across schools, to see if there were any variances, and I saw no variances across the schools, which is really good news for us. I'd like to think that means our district level PLC conversations are working. So then I started disaggregating it a little bit more. I thought, well, male, female, what can I find out there? And what we're finding is that we didn't see a real significant achievement gap in gender on English language arts SBAC in any early grades, but we did see some distances, some achievement gap. Let me say it differently. I'm moving too quickly. Can I reverse a little bit? Okay. If we look at this, we can look at F&P, which is that assessment I just told you about in progress reports. You're not going to see a considerable difference in this third grade cohort. But I started to think about what other results are there, and does that gender gap change as they get older? What I did find is that K through 5 didn't notice much in terms of their achievement gaps on state assessments. But what I did start to notice is that females began to outperform males as you start moving up into the middle level in the high school, specific to language arts. Now, language arts on SBAC is reading, writing, speaking, listening, research. It's not just reading. Then I wanted to look at English language learners and students with disabilities. So again, back to those 2 pieces of data for that third grade group, looking at their reading assessment and their progress report, there are achievement gaps. Obviously, you can see the difference between all students. So for the progress report, we just said 61%. Of that, when we looked at just ELL students, 50% of ELL students were reported as meeting, 11% with students with disabilities. Similar trends when we look at the assessment results. So those are definitely some achievement gaps we need to look at. As we've grown as a district, it's been more productive. In other words, when we look at smaller schools or smaller districts, some of these data points are considered statistically insignificant because our N counts are so small, but because we're now up to 300 students, we have enough that we can be able to say this is something that we can look at as an achievement gap. When we look at students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch in this third grade cohort, we also see another achievement gap. This does mirror what we see and have been seeing on our SBAC results, and that's fairly consistent across the grade spans. I'm going to move on to math unless you want to stop and ask questions.
Yeah.
Yes, Pat.
One question I do have, and this may, you may have, as you put it, a number that's too small to measure, but I'd be very interested to see minority groups, whether or not we're seeing achievement gaps compared
The place I
to.
can currently grab that right now is if I collate, and I haven't done this one, if I collate all of the K-5 progress report, you'd have enough, I think, to be able to look at that. If I look at SBAC across all grades, I could do that. But by individual grades, I've looked at that, and those numbers are fairly too small for individual grades.
Okay.
We're on the maths? Kim, do you have a question?
I just was struck by the free and reduced lunch discrepancy that continues to persist. So we went through that slide quickly, so I'm just looking at it on here and
Yeah.
continue to be struck by it.
I've been following with SBAC because those are large enough numbers to, on both math and literacy. It's been interesting with our new tool, Alpine Achievement, to be able to see with our local assessment data too. So it tells us that that is a significant issue and something that we should talk about in terms of a program. What kind of program, when I think about summer reading programs, when I think of like what are the supports that we would want to put in place for families who are experiencing food insensitivities that are also impacting their achievement levels. So move on to math, and then you can always go back and ask me a reading question. Oh,
so this is a cumulative, but it's not broken out per schools, correct?
yes. No, I just did it as group.
Okay, question, is there any individual schools, or is they all pretty much on par with the same findings?
Well, again, for this, I was just looking at third grade reading, and I didn't notice a difference across the schools, and looking at fourth grade math and didn't notice a difference across the schools. We always have differences from cohort to cohort.
Sure.
We have particular classes that we know in terms of a group that's going through, but nothing that's, and I've been looking at our SBAC scores even before we merged, kind of commingling them. We'll have years where, say, for example, an ADL and EMS may do this, but I haven't seen anything that's been consistent.
Spiking.
No.
Thank you.
In terms of fourth grade, so the 2 points that I'll have you look at will be, we have a new local assessment data point to look at. It's really new to us. So we adopted the Bridges math program over in the former Chittenden Central School District a few years ago, and then just this year new over in Founders in Essex Elementary. And we decided to use as our common assessment a Bridges math assessment 3 times a year. So with an understanding that this is a brand new program for a whole lot of teachers over in Essex Town, we chose to look at that. And then the other one, again, is Common Progress Report this year. We looked at the percentage of our students reported as meeting some Math Common Core standards. And the specific one we looked at is number in Operations Base 10. And then I have some more disaggregated data for you. So right now, Bridges math assessment, that winter assessment, 48% of our students were showing evidence or demonstrating proficiency. Let me back up. The statement that we made, we want all of our students in fourth grade to be able to demonstrate proficiency in whole language. That sounds easier than it whole numbers, I'm sorry, or whole language. Sure. Whole numbers. When we really started to look at that sentence, that's a tough sentence to measure because there's so many parts of that. Is it operations? Is it that they can count? Is it place value? So when we went into this assessment, we really had to look at the parts to try to figure out how do we actually measure that sentence that we came up with. And our math coaches helped us to look at the 3 sections of that assessment and came to the number we have about 48% that are meeting it right now. When we drill down a little bit more deeply, I mentioned earlier that the assessment has different parts. We can see that place value for this fourth grade cohort across all of the schools seems to be our lowest area. So that's something that we want to look at in terms of our instruction. When we looked at the progress report, we asked, I looked at how our teachers were reporting out because there's lots of measures that they look at in their classroom. So when they have to report out on how are my students doing on number and operation base 10 or operations and algebraic thinking, we're at about 61% to 66% we're meeting. Again, reported out by our teachers. And we looked across the schools in terms of the teachers are new to each other, and there were very few variances across the schools, which is really interesting. And I'd like to say it speaks to well to all the work that's been done in both former districts in terms of calibrating to those standards. In terms of disaggregated data, we didn't see any significant differences on our local assessment or on the progress report with regards to gender. And I did follow that one up to high school as well and found, unlike English language arts, where I said earlier that the females seem to be outnumbering the males, I didn't see that for math. We continue to see gaps, but a little bit less so gaps. The difference is being a little bit less between our all students and our ELL students and our students with disabilities for math as we do in literacy. But there are still achievement gaps. And I'm sorry the numbers didn't show up on that one. That's a graph I need to fix for you before we post it again. There continue to be achievement gaps again for students with who are eligible for free and reduced lunch, but less so in, again, math than in literacy. So that's an intriguing one for us to dig into a little bit more closely. So I'll just highlight a couple areas that came up for me as I was doing this and in some of the leadership conversations I've had individually with principals and as part of our data protocol. Obviously, we have an achievement gap with poverty. So we do see a persistent achievement gap in both math and ELA, more so ELA than math. So one of the questions that could come up for us is, what is it that we're doing to support the families? What is it that we're supporting, our after-school programs, our summer programs, and that's something I'd be interested in looking at over time. I did want to look at, once we had identified this as an achievement gap, I wanted to look at all the grades so you can kind of see the differences there. Blue being not free and reduced, and red being free and reduced lunch. And you'll see it kind of bebops around a little bit based on the grade levels, but fairly consistent. And then I cut the squiggly line at the top there. I wanted to look at, so what's the distance between the not free and reduced lunch and the free and reduced lunch eligibility students? And does that distance grow over time? And that's what you'll see there. Math kind of squiggles down a little bit and literacy squiggles up a little bit. So our gap, again, is increasing specific to ELA. Which again, to me, points to that critical piece, that statement that we said about all third grade students by third grade, or all reading by third grade. The other one that a number of principals and I have had a conversation is about that summer regression. In particular this year, we really saw this summer slide. So what does that mean? What does it mean in terms of what we do in the fall and what we do in the spring? So this group in particular that we were looking at, third grade, saw that big summer slide. And for some students, they didn't regain that initial reading level until winter. Was that an assessment calibration issue? Is it once they're back into the groove of school, they're able to sort of show what they can do independently? Is it a true regression? But this is one that in particular the elementary principals have been having conversations with me about. So in terms of next steps internally, so in reading, we're going to continue our work with our K-5 literacy coaches, and we've been working with a consultant from Columbia University, Beth Moore, to calibrate our use of those assessments, because if we're going to make decisions around them, we want to make sure we're assessing accurately and that we're calibrated around that. Analyzing those results, so she's doing some work with us around implementing Reader's Workshop and Writer's Workshop. We're running some courses here. But we're moving into, now that you know this about your students, what do you do? And now that you know this about this student, what do you do? Looking at the way that we design our interventions based on data. We've been exploring different materials and assessments related to explicit instruction and phonemic awareness. And talking about developing consistent entry and exit points for intervention services across our district. In terms of math, we have 2 math coaches. We're continuing to continue to support our implementation of a common math program and monitoring its effectiveness on student learning. And then, as I said, we have our math coaches that provide coaching to teachers as a form of professional development. We're looking at also fostering a new relationship or a deeper relationship with an organization called Vermont Math Institute, VMI. So that's a lot of graphs and Amy talking. I want to answer your question that you're not going to remember you asked me in the fall.
Okay, you do that, and then I have another question.
Okay, you asked me to track, and it was hard to do. It was harder than I thought. How are we doing, and how are the students who are with us doing, performing against students who came into our district later? I think you said it better than that.
Yeah.
Not a difference. Now, the only place I could look was SBAC. Because remember, we haven't been implementing our local assessments long enough to track over time. So I grabbed all students in grade 6, knowing they would have taken SBAC for 3 years, and students in 7 and 8, was I able to go up to 9? I can't remember. And I pulled out all students who've been with us for those numbers of years, those 3 years consistently, and any student who hadn't been, and there wasn't a difference, which was really interesting for me.
Yeah.
But again, that's one data point.
That's interesting, because when he did that in Westford, there was quite a big difference.
Yep.
That was a
And
few
again,
years
SBAC is a
ago.
fairly whole, big assessment, so I think some of these would be more interesting to look at.
But, yeah, I think we were looking at SBAC at the time. Yeah, interesting. Other questions?
I think
Pat had a part two.
I did well.
Let me leave with more homework.
I don't think so. You could probably answer this, but because you actually asked the question during your presentation as a hypothetical, but I'm kind of wondering if we do have an idea for the answer. You mentioned, how do we close the achievement gap for the free and reduced lunch kids, or prevent that regression from occurring over the summer? And you left it open as a hypothetical, so I'm going to ask the actual question: what plans do we have in place to address that, or what plans are we planning? I guess I just kind of want to know the answer to the hypothetical.
I don't have a perfect answer for you, but here's what I would say, sort of off the top of my head. Our system is growing, in my observation, increasingly tighter in identifying students early, all students who are struggling, and what I witness is a lot more time, energy, resources being spent on providing interventions. We also want to have a conversation about, well, before we get to the point of intervention, making sure that that first instruction in the classroom is good and meets the needs of all learners, regardless of where they arrive, because our data shows us that only 60% of our kindergarten students come in reading on grade level. So we don't want to replicate that. We want to be able to try to close that. And so how do you meet the needs of that? Well, one of the ways that you do is through explicit instruction in a reader's workshop, so that a student is reading at their own level, but that they're challenged to move along. Then we think about, what are the kinds of things that families who have food insensitivity need? What are the things that they struggle with? So we've had programs in the past, not consistently across the buildings because we're trying them. We have programs, I know, for example, Summit has these book bags that go home with students. And it has their books at their reading level, at their just right level, and their instructional level. And the teachers come in and volunteer to let kids come out every 2 weeks and swap out the books. Well, not all families can participate in that. It's hard to get here. We're a walking district, our parents are working. So trying to identify what are those programs that and I'm just using that as one example, all the schools do different things. So not necessarily targeting, this is a group of students who are living in poverty, what do we do to meet your needs, but how do you meet the needs of all students with a sensitivity towards, if we set it up this way, all kids can access it? That's been a challenging one. So I know I didn't answer that explicitly.
No, but it seems like, that obviously the whole point of getting this data and identifying these groups is so that we can, provide the intervention. So obviously all of this is great information, but for me it seems like the point of this great information is to act on it, and knowing how we act is where I'm really, kind of curious.
So much of it is on an individual basis, because we do have a number of students who beat that demographic. And so we want to be able to support them and challenge them in ways to be able to move forward. I don't know if that's a better answer than I just came up with.
One of the reasons why we're doing PLCs is because of this. So PLCs are known in research for exactly this, for closing an achievement gap. They're specifically talking about students, how they're doing, what do they need to do, how will we know they're doing well, looking at assessments together, curriculum. We need a viable curriculum. That's what PLCs can do for us. So when you can identify that viable curriculum and then see where students are at and have those conversations, you're moving your achievement gap closer. Also, as a leadership team, especially with K-8, we're really looking at schedules and setting priorities for those schedules. So the team, I met with the K-5 team on Wednesday, and that's their conversation is, you know, how do we create schedules where intervention is all hands on deck at that time? That's for this reason.
Okay.
So, and very clear, how do you get into intervention? When do you get out of intervention? What are those assessments look like? So that's all that work. It's really exciting work to be doing. And the principals, every time, it's really interesting to watch. Every time one goes away or teacher leaders go away to a PLC training, they come back so excited, so like pushing the system, like, when are we gonna do this? We have to do this. And it's just like, it's awesome. But it's really moving, like it's quick. Or one goes away and I'm constantly getting texts and pictures. Did you know this? Did you get this? Get this book. Did you buy this book? It's like, it's exciting though.
I also want to say, I mean, there's other things that are sort of non-academic that we look at. I'm often part of conversations with principals around the time that we serve breakfast.
Yes.
It's so that some of those ready to learn kind of things that we need to think about, and knowing that all those structures disappear in the summer. We do a nice job of providing those food programs throughout the community in the summer, but who's accessing it? And those are conversations I'm not necessarily all, a part of.
That's conversation will happen in April with our leadership team around breakfast.
Right, because readiness to learn, readiness to assess is an issue in our schools.
Yep.
Keely,
So I had one comment and one question. A comment would just be on the poverty achievement gap slide with all the graphs.
Mm-hmm.
The two bar graphs at the bottom are on different scales, which makes it a little hard to visually compare them.
Okay.
So I would be interested to see, like, it's hard for me to imagine what they would look like. I think the one on the left, everything would be a little shorter if it were on a scale to 100.
Yeah, they came out of our data system, so I didn't manipulate the scales. I'll see if I can figure out how to do that to make them the same.
But yeah, I'm just trying to imagine how they would look that way. My question would be, for the leadership next steps for reading, what is it about instruction of phonemic awareness in grades K-3 that has that particular item stand out? Is that something about the sort of things they're assessed on?
Well, so once we determine a student's independent text level, well, that's a text level. So what contributed to that? Comprehension, fluency, accuracy. And so the principals have started to, again, through their data dig, say, so what does our explicit phonemic instruction look like in the classroom outside of our guided reading instruction, outside of our reader's workshop? Is that an area that could help to, a small bar that could move a big bar? So they're meeting actually in about 3 weeks as a leadership group. We're bringing in our consultant, Beth Moore, and our 2 literacy coaches to kind of play around with that idea. If we added another additional instructional sort of moment in the classroom, could that help move that big bar? So we haven't kind of nailed it just yet.
Also help to identify students who are struggling in reading. Diane and I were just having this conversation earlier with the phonemic awareness.
Right.
So we might pick up students with dyslexia quicker if we're having explicit instruction around that.
There's also a dynamic actually of early, I'll use the phrase early accelerated readers. Students who come in reading at a high independent level already sometimes actually skip phonemic understandings because they're so good at sight words, and then it sort of, they hit a bump as they get a little bit older. So we're meeting as a group to kind of explore that and have the consultant come in and look more deeply at the data for our individual students to see, are there any particular trends that are causing some of those independent levels to be lower?
Al?
Yes. Good evening, Amy.
Good evening, Al.
Thank you for not presenting the Vermont data tonight.
Presenting what?
Vermont data.
Oh.
Compare.
We don't have it. I mean,
We don't have it.
That's
Right.
great.
Still don't have
If the whole state did F&P, I probably would have put it up there, but.
Yeah. Well, for over 5 years, I've monitored this free reduced creation. And it's the second every school in Chittenden County and in the state of Vermont. It's the same, even worse as you get further away from Chittenden County. There's a couple of thoughts that I've had regarding that we have to start thinking in a different way. And I think the equity book kind of reinforces exactly where we're at. There isn't any equity between the free and reduced and the general population students in general. That being said, I really believe that we have to make a different view. What are other people doing in inner cities where these problems are compounded on multiple levels and yet they're successful? And I would hope that the administration would take a look at the success and failures of these schools and what they're doing right, and bring some of those ideas back to our own area. I mean, it's so disappointing when I see these scores at 3rd, 4th, and 5th, because I know those scores are not going to change when they get to high school.
And the research is, like Chicago, 90-90-90 schools, what turned those schools around are professional learning communities. Exactly what we're doing with a real viable curriculum and having assessments that meet that.
I know.
But that's how you can close it.
PLCs, but I'm looking for the results. I'm data oriented. I want to see the results.
Me too.
And when you have results that change in any particular area, I think we have to understand those results both down and up as to what is being done. And that's where I'm at. You know, I've always asked for the data.
I know. I think the hard answer is depends, and that's not a very data-driven answer. So what Beth's talking about is getting our system tighter around knowing our students. And if we know our students well, how do we meet their needs? There are systemic things that some school districts do, like full wraparound schools with dental programs and health programs and free lunch for everyone. So those are some of those inputs that some schools look at putting in place. There are schools who also sort of shut out inputs. We will focus on literacy and math, and they reduce other offerings for students. So those aren't necessarily things that we've done as a district. Happy to bring things back in terms of what they mean, but sometimes those decisions are at a cost.
I think it's also a culture issue. It's more than just one thing, but the interventions are critical, and they have to be just in time.
And I will say you as a board have done a tremendous job of supporting intervention funding in terms of materials and personnel. It's an area that we are continuing to get tighter around.
Thank you.
Liz. I just had a question. I know that Erin McGuire has a new title of which is, as I think it's Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion.
Yes.
Is that the right title?
Yes.
I would love to see a job description or some kind of idea of what that would entail and whether that equity lens and the especially inclusion that was I forget what your name is. Katie. What Katie brought up. Whether that kind of attention is under her purview or where that falls, so that there's some, is she now responsible for that piece? If we could have some more information about what that would look like.
We will, as soon as, I think I said in my notes that I would, once we've presented that to the leadership team, we'll bring that to you.
The description and what that would look like. And might that be a place where Katie's concerns would land in that area, possibly?
I think it also, to be fair, it lands with all of us.
Of course.
And until it lands with all of us.
Of course.
And all of us, probably including community, is, that's where our success will be. Right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So along those same lines, Amy, what should our expectations be for achievement in the category of students with disabilities? Their results are always the lowest, and I've always struggled because you are lumping a lot of categories,
different disabilities in one category
together. And having dealt with people with disabilities for a large part of my life, I know that there are some realities about what the expectations can be for someone with a severe developmental disability versus someone with what I would call a learning disability. So I just don't know, as board members, how should we be looking at that category, and what should our expectations be?
Well, I did present data that was in all but. In other words, all students participated in our local assessments with the exception of students who were not able to access it at all, severe learning disabilities. I also presented it as all meeting a benchmark. An area that I'd like to challenge myself at is being able to produce data that is a little bit more growth centered. So what percentage of our students grew the appropriate amount? I spent a little bit of time with the principal on Friday looking through her third grade roster and looking at this. We started with the summer regression and trying to figure out, is there a profile of a student who's consistently regressing? Is there something we can kind of wrap our heads around in terms of trying to figure out what's going on with that? And we sort of unintentionally fell upon the idea of a number of students who were still performing low, but were making huge gains, but the benchmark changes. So one way you could do this is to continue to challenge me, to be able to figure out, how can I provide to you, our system is taking students regardless of where they're at, and they're consistently growing them. And then a fair question would be, at what point, what's a fair expectation of a student who may start at an A, where the grade level benchmark is an M, and to say, no, you need to get to an M by the end of third grade. Obviously a teacher wouldn't say that to them, but we're saying it that way when we look at the data this way. So I struggle with how to present that data in terms of how many students are growing and by how much and what is that adequate amount to grow, because the lower they are is the greater urgency. I don't know, I think I just talked in circles around your question.
Well, I at least understand that you're thinking about different ways to present that category to us, and I think that's helpful.
I would agree with you about the statement about students with disabilities, because there are so many disabilities and they are clumped with state data, with our local data, they're clumped together, and that we have students with math disabilities that are part of that literacy data. The same is true for ELL students. To say you're an ELL student could be quite a range, and yet they're often grouped together, and the state does that as well.
Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out. Other questions for Amy? Kim?
Look at it. It is pretty high level, but it's also helpful then to be able to look at categories where we couldn't before because the N was small. If we are craving the more specific data that lies beneath that, is that something that's available?
Can you give me an example?
Building based, or I don't, is it categorized by different disability, or into Martha's question?
When you start doing that one, it starts to get into a confidentiality issue when we discuss it here because it's a public setting. And then the other is the N count. So we have statistical significance. When you break it down into I think it's 13 different disabilities, those numbers are going to get pretty small. So those are conversations we can have internally, but we're challenged to have them here given that it's a public meeting.
No, understood. So I'm
happy to check with Dylan and Erin in terms of the numbers, but I suspect that.
Yeah, and not even just that category, but the racial diversity or other diversity categories where there might be another layer of detail in the information, or questions that arise out of building-based categorization, which we've never been able to do, but this year, in theory, we could do. Just.
I think about, because you'll probably even think about more. Think about them and let Martha know.
Go through Martha.
I think if there are particular, say for example, demographic categories, I think the only place I could really grab it would be SBEC, because then I could mix grades together, and then I'd have a large enough N count to give to you.
Okay. And then I guess my other question, and I know that was not the focus of this presentation, and it's maybe more for Beth, is appreciate our focus on grade 3 and 4 in literacy and math, but I think we will need to see some student data, or at least my interest would be in seeing some student data that is generated out of our middle and high schools.
Yep, absolutely.
In the not too distant future, because
We started that way, and then the presentation became really long. And so okay, how do we make this manageable so it's worthy of a conversation?
And you
So
want to
invite me back.
assessment data, and that's what we have at the moment. That's clear to read, and that it's been implemented, and it's part of our measurable outcomes.
But invite me back, and we can talk about middle school, high school.
And I guess my only other,
Yeah.
are we finding, I see that in big categories, our numbers aren't dramatically off between SBAC and local assessment data. Right, we had the local reading test, and then, was it SBAC or something?
Yeah, the only place
Are
on
we
this you'd be able.
triangulating? Are we looking and seeing that our local data is reflecting, as teachers look at it, student to student, local assessment is reflecting what they're noticing in SBAC results?
Yeah, so I gave you 2 points here. So the teacher's perspective, which is the progress report, and the local assessment. A third point is a state assessment. It's only available grades 3 through 9. So if you have me back, we can look at those 3 points together. What will be really helpful is looking at this spring. So this spring, we'll end the first year giving the same local assessments. We'll have the SBAC result, well, July. We'll have the SBAC results in July. And then we'll have the end of complete first year of a new progress report, K through 5, and a common middle school. So that would be an interesting one to look at.
Anything else?
Okay, Amy, thank you very much. Lots of food for thought. Any comments or questions from anybody in the audience? Sorry, Amy. Okay, great, thank you. All right, let's move on to our student rep report.
Alright, so we have papers for you guys.
Thank you.
If you could like grab one and pass on. Does anybody in the audience want a student report?
Do you have enough?
We have 15 minutes, so I think we have like a couple if anybody wants it. So we wanted this student report to be kind of more of like a, instead of just a presentation where we talk at you about what's going on, we really wanted to have it kind of be more of a conversational thing. Because I feel like a lot of the time it's just like you guys hearing what we're saying and then it doesn't get like followed up on or stuff like that. And so we really kind of wanted to talk like here in the moment, and if you guys have anything to say, that would be awesome. You can tell us. And then we also put like bullets at the bottom of the things that we're going to report out about, and if you guys have anything that you would like to write down and then give the paper back to us at the end, we would love that. We have a couple questions on there too. So one of the things, do you want to start with this?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so last week Laura and I visited Westford and we talked to the entire 7th and 8th grade just about things that they would like to see maybe like changed or some concerns they had. And what we found was that a lot of the concerns that they had were similar to the ones that we heard at ADL and what Laura heard at EMS. So I think from like here on out, we're gonna try to like get kids from the different middle schools together and focus on one thing that we can work on between now and the end of the year, like one actionable item to work on. And then we're also trying to visit other Chittenden County high schools like CBU, SB, Burlington to see how they're doing PLPs. And I think what will happen is that like Laura and I and maybe Kim and Liz are gonna visit in our free time. But then tomorrow we have a thing here that Mr. Reardon invited us to, which is us and some other EHS kids, a lot of underclassmen, which is really awesome, talking to teachers, I think, and administrators about PLPs and bulb and how to improve that. So that's really awesome, because I know like when I reached out to Mr. Rudin, he responded like immediately, and then this was something that he mentioned earlier, or like not earlier, but like he mentioned that at the meeting, and I think it's really awesome that Mr. Rudin like follows up like so quickly whenever Laura and I have a concern. And then I guess this is your part, right? The next steps.
Yeah,
Okay.
so next steps that we had, one of the things that I really wanted to talk to you guys about and kind of just address is one of the issues that I think a lot of students in all of our middle schools and at the high school face, especially with student government, is getting to teachers and getting to the administration and being seen as valid in the issues that we face and the things that we want to talk about and the things that we want to address and work on in our schools. And I did write this down. This is scripted because I thought about it a lot. So I said we need to have a serious talk about administrators and teachers building equal relationships with students. Staff alone do not make up schools. It is the students who are the very bodies and purpose of schools. We go to school to learn how to form our own ideas and contribute those ideas to our communities. And Grace and I, as student reps, have a responsibility to ensure that the ideas being generated by students are not just heard but followed up with. We need to make these ideas a reality and create a cohesive team between the board, staff members, and students. And there's no upper hand in teamwork, and there should be no upper hand in our schools. So we really want to organize teacher and administration student lunch meetings, or something like that every 1 or 2 months, that are mandatory for teachers or staff members to sign up for, like alternating. And students can come to these, like Grace and I can alternate to going or both go at the same time and talk to students and really get teachers and administrators as like a group working as a team. And this matched up with our shared community values, the one that talks about engaged and responsive teachers.
Do you want to have like a voting?
Yeah, also, was it Winooski that did that?
No, I think it was like
Brattleboro? Yeah. That had 16-year-olds and older were allowed to vote in town matters. I think local Liz elections, brought this. Yeah, local elections, yeah. And I thought that matched up with goal 12 on the board. I'm not sure if that's like a completed goal yet. I don't think it's official. But it was remain current and engaged on state and federal education matters. And I think that pairs up really well with that. Yeah.
Okay. Questions and comments?
Patrick.
Marla and Patrick.
I'm fascinated with their idea of administrators and teachers at lunches meeting. I heard the word mandatory, making it mandatory. If this is something that we agree with, we're in teacher negotiations now. Isn't that something that would have to be negotiated, because you can't make their lunch periods mandatory to be meeting?
There's some flexibility within the hours that are allowed for in the high school that would probably not require a side letter or separate negotiation.
It shouldn't be
based on their ebb and flow of coursework over a course of a semester. So I think that I forget which category it would fall under. I appreciate it, Marla. I thought about it the second I heard mandatory. But I think that given the sheer volume of teachers and students and lunches that might happen if they were happening monthly, I think that shared responsibility would probably fit within the confines of the contract without worrying about it for negotiations. Thank you for asking that.
Did I hear you say that would work with the high school?
I assumed they were speaking about the high school, but I would imagine, yeah, so I think that there are some
Instead of
spaces
stand there.
within the confines of the contract that
Yeah,
allow
it's
for
different
that.
lunch versus discussion.
Thank you for asking though, Marla.
I know you mentioned you guys kind of want to have this as a conversation instead of us just listening to you talk and then spitting back answers. So I guess kind of want to make it like that. Are you guys finding, because the impression that I'm getting is that you guys sometimes feel stuck in that you'll come up with a topic and you'll bring it to somebody in either the administration or the teachers or what have you, and then it just kind of fizzles out and you can report this back to the board. But even when you do that, you know, obviously since you guys have been here sitting on the board, you know, we have very limited power when it comes to specificity. Like, I completely agree with, for example, the phys ed credits, you know, if you do sports. I don't understand why that isn't just like a super easy thing, but you had mentioned that, you know, some teachers had concerns about their job stability, you know, so it didn't really go anywhere. And I know that was a topic that students felt strongly about, and it got to this level, which is realistically the highest level that you could conceivably attempt to bring it. And I don't think there's been any follow-up whatsoever on it. So do you guys know if there would be a good way for us to help you follow up on that we can kind of do that's in a board role? Or do you think that as you meet with these teachers, I would even say, and I hate to do it but I'm also realistic about it, is that there's a sense of legitimacy if an adult board member would go with you. You know, so if someone is tagging along, I think that maybe they're going to, if you're in a meeting with a teacher and it's, you know, 2 students or 3 students, it's going to be kind of vastly different than if it's a teacher and, you know, Martha, you know, and 2 students. You know, they're just going to treat the entire conversation, I think, probably differently. I mean, do you think that would help at all? Or
I mean, I definitely think you are right. We were just talking with Kim about this. It's surprising, and I think it's shocking in kind of a bad way that students have to have the support of so many adults for their ideas to feel valid or listened to in any way.
I agree.
And it's definitely been disappointing sometimes. And I think like you said about the conversations just kind of fizzling out. And for a fizzle, you need like a little bit happening at a time. And I feel like more than that, it's just a wall.
Drop off.
Yeah, it's just a drop off. And so I do think that it would be very helpful if we had, you know, one of you guys, like even just one or some of you guys backing us on this.
I'm sorry, I just don't think that's an appropriate role for a board member to play. I think we could have conversations with you about how to have those conversations with other adults, maybe give you suggestions, but I don't think it's appropriate for individual board members to be at that table. Kim?
I think something that's really important, though, that we have identified as a value that has come out of conversations that we've had in our communities is the elevation of student voice. We've spoke to that in bringing students onto our board, and we've not asked for accountability in terms of how that is being experienced outside of them sitting at this table. And so I think that is within our responsibility to ask, as we do with any new implementation, you know, is there the adequate support for PLCs? Is there adequate support for PLPs? Where we haven't asked yet whether or not our building leaders feel prepared for student voice that we are asking our students for. And I think that is a role of ours that would be really important. And if, again, there's so many priorities on Beth's plate, if helping students ferret out and brainstorm infrastructure ideas that would help them know where to go and how things get answered and what's the process and what can they expect, I don't think it's a panacea that every student request gets yesed.
But I think it is very reasonable that students understand the path for their voice and their passions, that they have an expectation of responsiveness, that our administrators have a comfort zone and support to feel uncomfortable in shifting some power, which is what we're asking for when we are asking to have there be student voice. We are asking adults to get a little uncomfortable and be responsive and learn together. And if we're not going to do that, then I don't think it's fair to have these guys sit here and try and represent student voice. So while individually going and advocating for gym credit is not a position I think as board members when we otherwise negotiate contracts is one that is our place, but listening enough to understand challenges, offer suggestions for other avenues, like how's it happening at other schools, how can you pull that information, what other advocates could you have join you. Those I think we're somewhat uniquely qualified to offer support to and mentoring to. So I think we have two roles in this, mentoring and coaching and supporting the questions that you would think administrators and staff would have and lending our support to you in that way, but then really asking for some evidence of how we're helping our leaders get uncomfortable to get comfortable with student voice. So that, not to shut Patrick's idea down, but to know that there are places that we can help.
Yeah. I think, as I said, while it's not appropriate to be at the table, it's very appropriate for us to sit with students and talk about how to approach things, much as we did with Nick when Nick wanted to have students be on the board, and the work we did with Nick and Jamal and some others in terms of doing research and how to bring the idea forward and the proper forums and so forth.
And maybe even if in collaboration with Beth there's ways that we can, as mentors, maybe Liz and I go with them to have conversations with principals about this is what we've heard from students as ideas, what would work in your structure, who are your people that they should go to, it's going to be unique for schools, and you have so much on your plate that if there is a piece of this that we are trying to help elevate that can take in information from other adults and help process. That's not like sitting there saying you have to do this because we're a board member. That's trying to listen to all sides and think a little creatively outside of the norm, because our leaders are used to the norm, our students are craving voice, and we've created space for it. We just have to help it not feel as though it's not being responded to.
And just to clarify, I did specify, within a board role when I was speaking of it. I wasn't expecting me to go to a gym teacher and say, and wag my, finger or anything like that. To be honest, what I am suggesting, I think, is more exactly like what Kim mentioned, is as a mentor role. I do feel very strongly that it feels like sometimes as board reps, sitting on the board, our students maybe aren't getting the legitimacy that of being heard that maybe they should be, and I'm not sure how to close that gap. That doesn't necessarily involve having a mentor necessarily listening at the table, even if we're not participating in the conversation. I guess I'm just trying to find out, a way that we can work as a board to make sure that happens, because honestly, if you guys don't find value in this, and if you come to these meetings and you feel that even after them, the issues that you bring up that our student voice issues don't get followed up on in any way, then I don't know why we would expect students to continue to follow up with this year after year.
So I'm going to change the dialogue slightly. I just want to clarify, Patrick, I didn't expect that you were saying you were going to go to a teacher, but I did think you were saying you could go with the students to meet with the teachers, and I just don't think that's an appropriate role for a board member.
Right.
But as we've said, advising students about how to approach administration, what kind of research to do, all of that, I think, is appropriate. So go ahead, Martha.
I just have a suggestion. I won't be at your grade reorg. Someone else will be running for my position. But I would suggest when you do your grade reorg and you do whatever you do in the summer where the board meets and sets goals, I think this is something very valuable to have your students with you when you're discussing this.
Yeah. We did that last year.
Yeah.
We would do that again. Good suggestion.
Yeah.
So, Al.
First of all, Kim, I just wanted to acknowledge your comments. I think they were really valid and appropriate. Did want to follow up question on development of PLPs. There is I'm getting a sense that we're not sure whether the PLPs should be implemented at the teacher level or at the guidance counselor level, the assistant principals. And there are different skills and information available to each and different. Do you have any, I know we're still, early in that implementation, but have you got any sense from students about which path they would like to prefer to go?
I think maybe more from the teachers, because we do it all during flex block. Yeah, and I think a lot of teachers are also very confused about like PLPs and kind of like how to go about it. This is back to Patrick's thing, I know, for taking you. I would say a lot of issues like don't get followed through because it ends up in Mr. Rudin's like plate and he's very busy, or maybe he disagrees with it, so it kind of just gets dragged out on. And I don't know really how to avoid that, because ultimately it is like he is the top administrator at Essex High School, and if he disagrees with it, I mean, it's kind of hard to change his mind, I feel like. And then with the gym credit thing, I think it's just because a lot of gym teachers oppose it, and he doesn't want to risk like offending them by going through with it. So I'm not really sure.
Campus one, he and I spoke, and he did go talk to CTE director, and then they're both gathering students, and so myself, Brian, students, Mr. Reardon, and Mr. Travis will meet. So that's being scheduled.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess it's also really slow because of scheduling meetings too, because that's a lot. So yeah, lots of meetings.
Yeah, could we get some follow-up after this?
As soon as we meet on open campus. Absolutely.
Excellent, thank you. It's an important question because setting goals, determining interests, aspirations, goes along with choosing courses and trying to reach those goals. It's very important, and I just want to make sure we get off on the right foot here. That's it. Thank you.
Other comments or questions? So you'd like us to write down some suggestions on here and give them back to you?
That would be awesome.
I'm going to try to do that.
There we go.
Okay. Thank you both. And we're going to expect reports from each month. Is that correct? Okay. Good.
Thank you guys so much for hanging in there with us while we
And
figure
thank
this out.
you. And, right, for helping us try to figure out how to make this work. Yeah, appreciate it. Okay, next is transportation. We have that report.
Yeah.
You want to just hit the highlights?
Sure, I'll hit highlights, and then Brian has, I asked him for a timeline of how things will work out this spring, so he will share that, well, spring and through even into the fall, and he'll share that with us after we go through some highlights of the updates. So we did have two trainees come through with the CDL test, but decided that they didn't want to be employed by Mountain Transit now, and they will in the fall. There's a long time between now and the fall, so as we know, anything can happen. And then we have one new applicant that's starting, but that's a 6-week out, as we know. It takes a long time. We're not seeing as many applicants come through. Some of the wins, Green Mountain Transit, we received a cost estimate for looking at Essex Junction neighborhood specials and working with them, which I appreciate Jamie trying to think outside the box and what can we do. And also, so that would be 3 routes for K-8, and then one more to replace that number 4, a neighborhood special, to replace the number 4 that they said they were going to drop. Although when you look at the numbers at the bottom of that number 4 route has a ton of kids, and Laura being one of them. Yes.
The number 4 route, I've been to the last 2 meetings with the village trustees and with the village select board. Both times GMT came and spoke about the elimination of that number 4 route, and I was pretty vocal about asking them to look into keeping it, because they began their study before we had the routes in place being used by the high school students, and they said that they've since then seen a pretty significant, like over 60%. I think.
Right. Well, when you look at those numbers, it's
Brian had definitely mentioned it before.
Really high.
Yeah.
But I thought it was worth mentioning that I've been trying to advocate as much as I can for them to, and it doesn't sound like they've officially pulled the plug on it yet. I think that they're still considering keeping it, but I mean, I know that there's a lot going on there.
They're holding a community meeting for Essex actually on the 8th of April. And I think it's 5:30 to 7, so it just precedes our annual meeting. But we'll make sure that people in our community know about that. It's going to be at Lincoln Hall.
So Jamie's been working with Essex Elementary School on the dismissal time. So that has actually picked up more times. It has had a ripple effect for the other schools, and we've picked up like 5 to 8 minutes on the dismissals for Founders and the middle school. And then some action items are, let's see, the insurance provider, which we had let you know this through Visbit. They're putting together policies, procedures, manuals for school districts to follow. We really feel that's important guidance for us. We don't want to set something and then have to come back. So and there are insurance providers. So I'm a little worried about detail that might be in those procedures and not thinking about different communities, but we'll see what they come up with. So we're looking forward to getting that information so we can do some more work with our procedures and where we're at. I think those are basically the highlights. We do, in our special ed transportations, the one that we do in-house, we still continue to have face challenges with that. If we have somebody out for a while, we pick up with some van drivers and continue to get those kids to school on time. But that is always a struggle, and that's our in-house. Hard to keep everybody healthy and actively driving. So I watch that in our office daily. Yeah, Keely.
Looking at how the CDL drivers who just finally made it through the pipeline that we've been waiting for months don't want to be employed by Mountain Transit, is there a way we could hire them in our in-house transportation system and then like move some drivers over from there to driving regular routes?
It might be one of the things that's unattractive is not having work over the summer for them right now, having so few remaining weeks in the school year and then having a gap in their employment, which would be a possible case with us as well. So, but we could look to see if they're interested. We do some summer programming and transportation, but certainly not to the level that we do school year.
Are we developing the hybrid bus driver / summer reading specialist?
Reading on the bus. Yes.
There's a book about a pigeon.
Don't let it drive. Just don't let it drive it.
Wheels on the bus go round.
And then do you have any questions about the rider ship analysis that Jamie put together for us? Or any comments, observations?
Well, it does make you wonder if we could do full transportation for all who wanted if we developed a subscription service.
Yeah, I think we would the difficulty is what's our threshold in having people enter in and leave that subscription, because as you start to create that on demand, like we run basically a subscription service in some of our special ed, for instance, where there can be days on, days off, and so forth. And what that impacts is every single person on that route, almost on a daily basis, has to be contacted with regards to when they might be picked up or when the drop-off would be. So you start to scale that to the 600 students we are transporting.
I'm saying you have to subscribe if you ever want to get on the bus.
Yeah, it's difficult to imagine those teeth.
Maybe that won't work because maybe of the 50 to 60% who aren't using the bus, they're going to want to be sure that they could on the one day they wanted to.
Right.
I don't, but I have to believe that there are a lot of families who have made a conscious decision that they're not ever going to use the bus.
And we probably have over 70 families that have communicated that to us, and we have literally eliminated transportation for them. And in some cases, it can be a considerable savings to a route, depending upon where that residence is. But there does come to that point where we're never we don't start the school year with the same students we'll end the school year with.
Sure.
So we're constantly churning, to some degree. So then you're always on this demand, and that demand always then fluctuates where it would be. And you start to, you just ripple that inconsistency of routes and the impact to the drivers and the impact to the parents, and then also the risk for students to be outside at the wrong time or inside at the wrong time. So we know that consistency really helps in our delivery model, and we know that we provide more transportation than people avail themselves of. And so, we may be able to look at some on demand, but these numbers we're transporting, on a regular daily basis, it's 680 students. So at that scale, it starts to become pretty large. I like the thinking, though. Massachusetts works on a subscription basis, and if you don't subscribe and you want it, you wait, 6 weeks for it. I think that could be a problem when somebody just moves into your district and you tell them you're not going to help them get to school for 6 weeks. Yeah, it's the time. The district in Massachusetts just has a waiting period so that they can readjust and try to gather changes at once and then make changes and then operate those for some kind of known period of time.
Something to keep thinking about. Other questions or comments?
You touched upon eliminating possible routes based on some parents saying they'll never take the bus, but I guess the concern I have is if the elimination of the route is based on knowledge that some of the kids will never use that. Will there, hopefully, there'll be agility to put those routes back in place should there be families within that geographical location that will want to have their kids transported. Plus also another concern I have with the subscriptions is if we start going to a subscription base, I'd want to see the agility to change if circumstances change and not have a delay in implementation because of something that changed. Now they want the ridership.
Yeah.
Having to wait 6 weeks for transportation, as emphasized in Massachusetts, is not palatable.
Just to follow up on that, I think the effect of somebody coming in and out of the system is a lot bigger when you have door-to-door stops than it is in like an aggressively congregated stop model like in Westford. So
for high school.
Westford High School.
Right. So like if somebody moves in and you can say, here's the nearest stop, you can go there until we do something with our route, that could be a stopgap situation. I mean, like at least getting people away from everyone having to drive to the schools and cause horrific traffic and maybe be running people over. Like, it would, I mean, even aggressively congregated stops make a big difference for everyone in the community.
Diane?
Not to sound like a smartass, but we could definitely improve the number 4 route if we had ADLs have a temporary stop and pick up at ADL, and parents wouldn't be making the traffic problem that's addressed and noted here. And maybe we could have a little more clout with GMT. I'm astounded that we only have 20 daily riders for this EHS February ridership. 28% is doing, and that's it. So, but this is coordinated with the coming from the islands or coming from Westford?
That's the Westford. We have 2 routes in Westford. Their average daily ridership is 20 out of a total eligibility of 74. They also pick up, they're assigned, those Westford routes are assigned another 18 students that live in Essex that are along the way on Route 128 and Old Stage Road.
Those are included in the 74?
No. The winter survey includes the 18 residents assigned, so both the fall, yes.
Okay, any other?
Included at least in eligible. I'm not sure if they're included, if they're the 18 in those.
Yes. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
I have a few questions to ask, and I have to be quite specific. I'm asking this as a taxpayer, as a bus driver.
Okay, can you identify yourself?
Number one, I'd like to know what the...
Wait, can you identify yourself?
I'm sorry.
Say your name for the record.
Chris Nagel, a.k.a. Duncan Brown. That's an inside joke. Well, I made comments on the Essex Westford Facebook page and through a Facebook page called Duncan Brown, who is my dead dog. And I was tracked down and told I'm not allowed to say anything as a bus driver. That being a bus driver, I've lost my rights to the freedom of speech. But I am allowed to speak as a taxpayer, so there are a few questions I would like to know. The people that are in their bright lime suits at the schools, what is that costing me as a taxpayer?
Do you know that number for that contracted service? The ones that are helping with the
Green Mountain's constant security
dismissal.
and traffic.
Oh, okay.
We pay them on an hourly rate.
I wouldn't say they're helping one bit, but what is that costing me as a taxpayer?
They charge us $35 an hour.
$35 an hour. Okay. And then we have...
We're also very open that if that's not meeting people's needs, this feedback is valuable.
I guess what
been unable to get
because it's very hard for me to
separate being a taxpayer and a bus driver because I'm privy to some things as a bus driver. We have never, as bus drivers, had an issue at the Founders Middle School junction where there are stop signs, and now they're down there directing traffic. Honestly, what we're seeing is when, particularly Founders School, when the children are released with their parents, they're wandering between the buses. They're not using crosswalks. I can't, it's really virtually impossible to not discuss this with the knowledge I have. We as bus drivers are in great fear that someone is going to be hurt. Somebody may be killed because children, parents are just willy-nilly going between these buses, stepping out in front of buses. And we're trained, and I understand, having been to a few different meetings, you don't understand what it takes to be a bus driver. Parents definitely don't. The requirements that we have to go through to get our CDL licenses, it's not as easy as most people think, and the training is quite rigorous. And part of that training, if you notice, a bus has mirrors all over the place, but there are still blind spots, and we are trained to watch for children at bus stops, in schoolyards. This is just a recipe for disaster, watching those, and the parents, I hate to say it, aren't much better than the kids. It's just like, oh my God, what are you thinking? You just stepped out in front of a moving bus. But we're trained to be alert. We're trained to watch for that. But if it keeps happening, and I don't see these people as being a help at all. I see them, quite honestly, as being a waste of money. And I don't see why it should be an issue to be able to say to the parents, you need to, if you're coming out the side door, either, or the front door, you need to go across the crosswalk. I mean, we are trained, and it is the law, you must stop for somebody in a crosswalk. But when they're stepping out between a bus or a car.
Yeah, I mean, our children, the safety of our children is threatened by our school community.
Oh, I have no doubts that everybody in this room is concerned.
And so we're undertaking a 3-week process of trying to put more adults at the location to try to calm some traffic, to try to give some instruction, and then we're going to evaluate it. And if it doesn't work, then we're going to try something else.
Since the beginning of the year, no one has been out, I'm going to say, that many times in front of Essex Elementary as we're dropping students off. I'm watching parents drop students off. These are elementary kids. And as they get older, just like my own children, we expect more of them as they get older. As a bus driver, I cut the little guys slack because they're learning. Founders, they should be a lot better. Middle school, they should be great. High school kids, I love them. They're great kids. Well, I don't drive them anymore, unfortunately. So when I see parents literally dropping off elementary kids on Bixby Hill Road, and those kids are running through that parking lot, and that's not anyone here's fault. You're not responsible for a parent, for their responsibility, but somebody who we used to have every day. Ms. McGrath was out there every day watching those children, every day, every afternoon. And I'm speaking for myself, but I think I can honestly say I'm speaking for every bus driver in this town. There are some incredibly dedicated drivers that look at your kids like they're my kids. You know, and we really care, and we're very concerned about the lack of organization in front of the schools. It's scary. It just is really.
Yeah, and it's spreading pretty significantly now. Down
and I'm open for any recommendation, and I understand originally these people are going to be there to sort of, my boss calls it the parents and the kids out in front of Founders herding cats because they're all over the place. And now we're seeing them doing other things, and I don't know if someone directed them to do that, or if they took it upon themselves. But it's like, guys, we need you over here. Herd the cats, get them to the crosswalk. So whatever you folks can do to help remedy that situation, I for one would appreciate that.
I think Brian has heard you, and he's the person who needs to hear that. Keely.
First of all, thank you, taxpayer, for driving a bus. Second of all, months and months ago, I know I mentioned a couple of times that as a parent in the Junction, I foresee a need for us to have some sort of community education around how to interact with buses when suddenly we have not only the psycho derby of the Holy Family parking lot, but there's also buses on some side of the school that we could have a psycho derby with. And maybe whatever information you've been preparing to roll out to us whenever that rollout was supposedly going to happen could be rolled out to the parents at Founders and other places, like, hey, refresher on not to walk in front of a bus. And you guys can play test it over in the town so that when we finally get a bus in the Junction, we'll get the most up-to-date educational information on what to do.
Okay. Great. Anything else?
Just something as a suggestion, Martha. In the Junction, we're walking district, but I live in an area where there were no sidewalks. And the parents, and I went through it with my son 30 years ago, where parents would drive down, they leave the kids off at school and they're speeding out of there as fast as they can go. And Tim, that used to be a school board member of the Prudential Committee, he lives up on that hill near Fleming. He actually went out and took video, and he brought it to the trustees, and that community got a sidewalk because they realized how dangerous it was. So I'm wondering if you could use videotaping. I mean, you've got the high school, you've got videotapers. I'm wondering if you could do that and show people this is what you're doing. Because I think it was an eye-opener when Tim did that.
Interesting idea. Thanks. Okay, I think we're going to move on.
We have one more thing for transportation that is a handout, and Brian will.
So the first off is that this is, the intention of this is to provide it 2 weeks before your next meeting. So that's when we will thoroughly review it. So that's in an effort to make sure that information's in your hands well ahead of time, provides you an opportunity to ask clarifying questions, and puts us in the very best position of supporting the board. What I've tried to do is map out with a base assumption of most likely, and that most likely is that we'll have no additional drivers than we have currently right now. And that we can also talk about worst case scenario of having less drivers than we have right now. But tried to map out between this meeting of the board, and all the way through July into August and up to October, with a series of things in which the board will be presented some policy coming up at the next board meeting, some revisions to B4, which is the drug and alcohol policy, along with procedures that the board had requested, where we'll have the reconciliation with VISBIT. We'll have a thorough review of this, and it tries to map out what a decision-making tree is for us to make, knowing that the board has the exclusive role of approving contracts and expenditures over $15,000 as they relate to transportation. And as we go through those processes in which the board will either approve or reject contracts and bids, then the board will be in a primary role of creating the strategy and the transportation plan for the 2019-2020 school year. In this, I hope you see that we do look for, in August, to try to do a blitz of safe routes to school, and we've been working really closely with Essex PD to try to have an all hands on deck I mean, we've gotten to a point right now where we have uniformed officers that are standing in the road and being passed with buses with red lights on. So we have a level of sort of incivility on our roads that I intend to put my greatest effort towards improving for our community, but this is not just a school issue. I mean, Saturday's not much better around here. So we've got an issue, and the greatest part of it is we're the ones that can improve it. The school community can improve this issue. But we're gonna have to work, and this is gonna have to be part of that engagement of like, do we want, as Chris said, do we want that worst case scenario to happen to tell us that we should have done something more? I mean, we have Essex PD that is pleading with us to have people stop pulling over on Maple Street on a state route, stopping their car and waiting for their kids to come and find them. It's only a one-lane road. And people are stopping on both sides of it. And that's out of convenience. That, you know, we're not closing up shop at 3:16. Like if you came and picked your kid up at 3:35, you would find that parking lot to be amazingly less crowded. So we need to figure this out and work on it, because there is going to be a tragedy, and we're trying to do some experiments to try to take care of it. But we'll go over this. I'm open to other questions that flow through Martha. It's trying to be an open book. It's trying to work on a most likely to worst case scenario, that there's no reason we will be innovative and quick to respond to anything that exceeds our expectations. But I think that the community at this point in time wants a clear understanding of what's it really going to be like and how bad can it really be, and then we can move forward from there.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate you putting this together, and as Brian said, if you have specific questions, it would be helpful to get them to Brian before the next meeting. As it has been all year, this is going to be a tricky conversation because a lot of this is administration, but certainly when it comes to contracts, that is an area that the board does have control over. Okay, are we ready to move on? Yeah.
I actually just had a question on this.
So we're not going to discuss this.
It was
till the next meeting. Sorry, but
it was just a transportation question. I was trying to wait until we were done.
Okay.
I was just wondering if there was any planning around ensuring that children who have transportation in their IEPs are able to get it, because that has been an issue this year.
Yeah, I mean that Beth covered some of that with the issues we've been running into with a small staff of 3, and then all of a sudden finding ourselves down 2.
We had 1 for a bit this year.
I was told directly that there wasn't enough buses at one point, and it wasn't about the staffing person being on it was about not having enough buses. So
and that as well, when we've had a full staff, we've had transmission issues and aging fleet. So it's been, both of those things have created an unacceptable service level.
Yes.
I could be a helper on one of those buses if you want.
Great.
If you'd like to sign up right now.
What did she say?
She could be a helper on one of the buses if you want.
That would be fabulous. Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Stand up.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to move us along because it's getting very late. Does anyone have, do you want to highlight
I can
anything?
highlight. I'll highlight quickly through the superintendent's report, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I think the thing that I want to highlight the most, and we touched upon it before with Liz's question, about Aaron McGuire and Dylan McNamara, their roles changing. So in order to really meet our vision and I made a systemic change in looking at the admin and our roles, the different roles at the district office. And so we have 2 special ed or student support service coordinators. I focused their roles and have been working with them, and Dylan will take over more of, his will be the director of social emotional learning and wellness, with still having to do the duties of a director of student services, but with an IEPs that will mainly focus around behavior. And the ones that touch that. And then Aaron McGuire will, we know that we have a lot of work to do with equity and diversity, and also even with inclusion, and Aaron will take that on. This does begin next year, although we do have some audits and surveys that we want to hopefully get out before the end of this year, so we can really look at the results over the summer. Both of them, we've been working on what does that do for their roles and responsibilities, and as I said in my notes, or I did at some point, I will bring that information, we'll share out their roles and responsibilities once they've shared with the leadership team and get really clarifying questions, and they can get that down before they bring it to the public. So we have then as leadership team focusing on outcomes. When we look at our literacy, we ask them what have we done differently since we've implemented our new continuous improvement plan. So I put evidence in here under each one of those. I think the biggest result of our new continuous improvement plan is really having the leadership team work together, especially in K-5, creating a schedule where there's a 90-minute block for literacy. That was not consistent with our time change. Lengthening the day at our earlier grades was able to make that a 90-minute block across the district. So that's something that I think was a clear result of our continuous improvement plan and looking to see what's needed across literacy. Also, our professional learning communities really focusing in on literacy K2, and that statement being made that all students will read by the end of grade 3 really forced that literacy work, and they continue to work on that. And also, as I said before, the K-5 principals are really looking at intervention and how they can create the best schedule for a really intensive, good intervention to happen within the day. So that's some powerful work that they're doing. And then in mathematics, again, for the focus around that, it was really implementing Bridges, as you've been told, a program across the district. And now we need to do some work around how does that meet the curriculum and all that. But we're waiting, where Bridges is new to a lot of teachers, they're getting professional development in that. And what does that look like in across the district? So I think that is the highlights. The PLPs, the personalized learning plan, there's a task team. They're meeting with students at each of the schools, Westford Middle School, Essex Middle School, ADL, and EHS. So that task team is meeting with students. They had their first one today. And the hope is that out of these meetings, they'll end up with some student ambassadors to be part of the task team this summer and work with the adults around PLPs. And then April 2nd, Eric will bring that information to us and the feedback that he gets from students on that work. He's pretty excited about that. I think I want to say they were in Westford today. And then, let's see, under the fiscally responsible budget, I think that the budget that we presented to you really was focused around our vision and our building equity throughout the system, which is great work to do in our future. And also the audit is proof that the financial statements are valid. And good. Brian's been doing a great job, and Kathy. Yeah. And you've been receiving your quarterly financial report, so that's evidence And then our video has been released across, and the goal was to have that for our budget, and it happened. So that's been out and released. It was released to parents, and then it went out on social media. And that's about it. As in our leadership team meetings, we have been diving into data, and we have a data protocol that Amy taught us that she had recently learned. It was great conversations, K-12, looking at reading data at the elementary, and to have high school principals really engaged and involved in those conversations. It was great. This is the new book we're reading. All Learning is Social and Emotional, Helping Students Develop Essential Skills for Classroom and Beyond. It's the same authors that wrote the book that you're reading, Building Equity, so that's exciting. That's it.
Questions, comments? Kim?
You mentioned that with the new titles that you were doing some audits, and what that meant.
Yes, so we want to do some surveys, or in this book they call them audits too, in the Building Equity. So in the back there's some student surveys, parent surveys. So we want to look at that and see where to start and how do we get those out to people and start collecting some data.
Is that likely to happen this spring?
I would like it to happen this spring. We'll see if it can. My hope is that at least it can get to students this spring, and figure out what that looks like, and we can start there.
Other questions or comments? That reminds me, Beth, that the State Agency of Education has been promising
yes.
a statewide climate survey.
We still know. I actually asked today because I was with people when I was at the Integrated Field Review in Burlington. I asked people from the agency, and there still is not one.
Is there any expectation that
it's not a priority at the moment, I was told.
Next year.
Probably not. So at some point we should have a discussion about
yes,
whether we're going to create our own, buy our own, as CCSU had done in the past, or what we should do. Because we just can't go all these years without having that information.
I'm going to pass this way and this way. These are thank you notes from the high school students when they when they brought the Black Lives Matter to you. So okay. I'm going to hand these out as you continue on.
Okay, good. All right, so planning for the annual meeting and the school budget vote. We did have a goal of trying to increase voter participation. I'm sorry Brendan's not here because he had some specific ideas, but what thoughts do folks have? Diane?
Both Brendan and I had discussions about getting people out to vote. Where he initiated an idea and I've followed up with it. It's charting how many people have voted. Natasha, who works in Brian's office, put together some data. I've fleshed out data beyond that. So in the conversations I'm having, it's become apparent that signage, getting people off, I guess their even keel of the day by putting a sign out and letting them know that there's actually a vote today. As our last vote with town meeting, the signs seem to have not been apparent, and people noticed that and actually remarked that there was no sign at 5 corners. I, of course, am the presiding officer for the poll here at the high school. What happened in Westford, not necessarily tell you. But I do know that in my conversations with Nanette, who's the clerk out in Westford, and Mark Droppa the other day at Fine Arts, both of them noticed that Westford is not accustomed to voting in April. So it's a new event for them, and they need the reminders. Well, actually, I think the entire 2-town district could use the reminders that voting is happening on April 8th and 9th for us. And so even if we use the lawn signs that our most recent candidates for election use, it would be a low-cost event to try to get some of these out at critical intersections to remind people that we are voting. Perhaps that might work. By the way, in my reading, in the Free Press of all places, it actually noted that 34% of people over the age of 65 do not use the internet. Do not use the internet by choice, not because they don't have it, although in this state we have a lot of people who don't have it because they can't get it, but in this case they don't use it. So they must be reached somehow. We say that we have 1/3 of our population over the age of 65 is not, then we need to reach them. Those are the individuals who, by the way, vote by habit. So we need to reach people, and that's one of the suggestions that has come up that I thought I would share. Okay, Free Press doesn't seem to be as viable as it has been in the past. I think we needed to use other routes. Perhaps we need to, as I've heard earlier today, we need to reach out and go to where our voters are and address that, you know, so we need to figure out somehow of getting there to get people. You know, perhaps we need to be out in front of the grocery store. You know, sort of a thing. Just like the Girl Scouts are out there selling cookies, maybe we need to be selling the fact that people need to be civically involved. I don't know. I mean,
Cookies are more popular.
I know cookies are more popular.
So I think the idea of a few lawn signs isn't a bad idea. We actually did that for the vote on the merger. I think we purchased, how many, Keely? Maybe it was 10 or 15.
It was like, it had to be at least 20. I mean,
I can't remember. There were.
I put out 10, and I wasn't the only one putting them out.
I put out a bunch.
Yeah, I put out some in Westford. So, is that something we would, I mean, how much do they cost these days, Pat?
Better if you buy them in bulk. I bought 50 signs for $150, so about $3 a pop.
So,
Is that?
You're cheap.
Yeah. You can get them cheap if you go online. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I used to have all the wires. So I think when we did that, we just bought the sign.
Right.
And I had a ton
of wires.
I've gotten rid of most of mine. Yeah. So anyway, I don't want to spend a ton of time talking about that right now, but let's see if we can. It just has to be a vote. School budget vote Tuesday.
Not vote yes.
No, you can't say vote yes, right?
Yeah.
Yes, keep.
So, in addition, when we were preparing for the merger vote, we tried to talk about it a lot on Front Porch Forum. And then I guess we've discussed various things in the communications meetings. Like I go in for weird ideas, like put one of those car dealership noodles over by the
we like that one.
over by the town clerk's office anytime now to just be like early voting for the school budget, or get somebody in the community to donate like ice cream vouchers if you are a teenager and show up to vote, just as an effort to get people who are students here at the high school.
I don't, yeah. So the communications task team is talking.
We have talked about things, but
Andre and
The
Grace.
signage you were referring to, that's alerting everybody to vote Westford, Essex Town.
Yeah.
Because the other idea to emphasize again about absentee voting. And I'm not sure how we bring that across, but that's another idea.
The town clerk in Westford will put it
Right,
in
get all
the
three.
front porch forum. I don't know if the town clerk in Essex Town does that.
I don't know, I suppose we could ask someone in the town office to do that, because they're restricted by Front Porch Forum has how many times they can post.
Well, we can post something.
Well,
Can they put a vote now sign out front?
a vote today sign?
Like up front, like
Yeah.
I'm sure there's got to be a sandwich board in all these town offices that can just say early voting open now.
Right.
Yeah, we do.
Which I think she does.
For a school budget.
3 foot by 5 foot
And
sign.
we'll have a contested race in the junction this year, so there may, just by virtue of that, have greater turnout.
Maybe. So the Essex reporter will undoubtedly cover that.
They've been in touch, so I
They've
would imagine
been in
that's coming up.
touch, yeah. Grace?
I don't know. I guess just like from like my experience, I don't know. Like I'm a student gov and we put up posters. People don't really look at that kind of stuff, so I don't know if putting up signs would necessarily help and might just be wasting money. But I mean, and then second thing is like I feel like people don't vote because like I feel like people assume that the budget's gonna pass every year no matter what. So people who vote yes are like, well, if if I don't have time, it's fine because like it's gonna pass anyway. And then people who oppose it are like, well, I'm just gonna get outvoted, so why should I vote? So I think it's just like what people think is gonna happen causes people to not vote. And I don't know how to address that, obviously.
Which is very discouraging, because just a civic responsibility, but
That's right.
yeah. Yes, my experience is the only thing that gets you higher voter turnout is when there's controversy.
Exactly.
And I don't think we want to create controversy about the budget, frankly. Other thoughts. I do think signs out in the public help, because if I'm coming to the stop sign and sitting there at the corner of Gold Stage and Route 15, and I see Patrick's sign or Irene Minner's sign, I notice it because I'm just waiting there. So I think it's a little different that the multitude of posters that line the walls in the high school. Kim?
I think I noticed at around town meeting day time when many other school districts, most other school districts are voting. If you drive through Colchester, they've got signs out, strong schools, strong community, please vote. And those, whatever signs we choose to create could have language that is not specific to a year, so it's able to be used year over year. No particular date. Sandwich boards out all over. I know Essex Town Schools all have them, and the central office, I think. So there are.
Yeah, could just say.
I'm sure
budget,
all of our schools must
budget
have.
vote Tuesday.
That's right.
And you can put them out
the previous Wednesday.
before. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But our town office could get, as soon as they're ready to take early voting, could have signs out saying early voting now for school district questions. So,
yeah.
But I think it's worth the investment in signs to have them and get them out the week before or whatever is the right timing.
Okay. Anything else about the annual meeting or the school budget vote? Okay. So the annual meeting starts at 7 on the Monday, April 8th. So hopefully most of us will be there. All right. So next we have our monitoring report.
Thank you. I apologize that this didn't get to you guys earlier. I'm really glad I got to it. So my interpretation on this goal is the goal is to remain current and engaged in state and federal matters. Compliance, I felt, would be achieved when we're utilizing the resources available to us through the VSBA and other avenues to remain current on state and federal matters. And that we're voicing our issues and connecting with our legislators. So I didn't read it verbatim, but that was the essence of it. We had lots of opportunities that Martha, myself, our administration, where we were doing direct outreach on these topics. So there might have been multiple emails captured in the months that I've referenced there as back and forths. We had, of course, invited legislators to join us for the reception and conversation. I would recommend we continue to do that. I think we have strong relationships with our legislators right in our community, right here. I think we have a little more challenge in making same connections with the senators, and that is just by virtue of the way the Senate representatives go. But we are fortunate to have Dylan, who sits on the Ed Committee, to continue to use us as a resource, and we have an ongoing dialogue with him on matters related to education. We, ironically, have state and local updates on every agenda. We happen not to have it on today's full agenda, but we make it anyway. The legislative updates, I think Martha and I are typically drawing from our knowledge or experience, and everybody has the opportunity, and I think is probably skimming at least the legislative updates from the VSBA and VSA. You know, of late they are deciding whether they're going to delay on Act 46, so we can pretend we had it on the agenda because that's the latest update, that matter remains outstanding. So, and then board attendance, I reached out to Carrie and Lorna first. I didn't know who was the right person, but Carrie was able to give me data on, collectively we attended 27 trainings, regional meetings, conferences, or webinars in 18 and 19. Diane wins. She, with the meetings and webinars, hit 8 of them. So thank you, Diane, for your investment in remaining current. And I do think this is probably an area that we could intentionally look at what's being offered and think about where we want to ask for collective board learning together, whether that's webinars. I think they're looking at how to deliver best so that it's not the same type of huge ask on an evening, or, you know, coming out to do a regional program on, you know, Policy 101 or something, and finding out it's just a night that everybody in the area has board meetings, or the board that really wanted to go has board meetings. And we have brought Nicole in to work with us on some of this, which is great. But I think it is something the VSBA continues to work on, and I think it's something we can think about in our summer retreat. Where are our collective interests and areas of learning, and when can we prioritize that together? But I think largely we are in compliance in this category, and do our best to remain engaged with our legislators and on matters that are important statewide as well. Any questions, thoughts, comments?
I would add that our local reps have, and now they've gotten to the point where the local reps from both District 1 and District 2, A2 and A1, are having coffee chats. And both Patrick and I have made the coffee chat, they have them once a month, and discuss whatever the populace who shows up for the hour and a half talks about. And so it could be school issues, as it was, someone was there the last time dealing with grading, so there was a discussion about grading. There's discussion about personal learning plans, that was at the last one, among other issues with guns and this and that.
Would you be comfortable with me adding that to the bottom of the list before we accept this monitoring report of evidence that's like emails, resolutions, testimonies, invitations, board members, adding legislative coffee chats?
Yeah.
And I like, if you're okay with that, I'm gonna add that as evidence so that we are reminded that that isn't something we could avail ourselves of and that you guys are doing, but that we could avail ourselves of.
They do put out a notice as to when they are. I think they're in the Essex Reporter, if not in the Front Porch Forums. So, I mean, it's possible for us to hear our constituents because they're drawing for the same constituent base. And the last time there were people who were from Milton and Colchester, a whole bunch. So it wasn't just our locals, okay, coming because they wanted to talk to about some issues that our reps are on bills that they're, so they wanted to talk to those. So
Thank you for the reminder. I think that's great.
But I think it's something we need to consider if you're available at those times.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Great.
Thank you.
Are there any questions or comments?
Thank you, Kim. I think that's excellent. I apologize. I didn't think about who might do the next monitoring report. So I'll go through the goals, and if any of you has thought about a goal that you'd like to do a monitoring report on, please email me. Otherwise, I'm probably going to look at the goals and reach out to someone and ask you to do one. Okay. Communications update.
Budget, we've been working with Ben and with the district on budget, so that's happening. And just a quick update on the planning that we're doing for the May 7th board meeting with the Voices work. Just to remind us that this is an invitation from the board to provide an overview of the equity lens and the framework for the district and how we're going to realize our vision. And so the work just today began about planning what that's going to look like. And one thing, and we'll be working closely with Beth about the content, what that presentation will look like. It's not the board who's going to shape that we're going to be working closely, but the invitation to the community is going to come from the board to come and spend some time with us while we dive into the equity lens and really focus on the why this is important, why the district, the board, and the administration are moving in this direction with this framework. So that planning is underway, and just wanted to let you guys know about that. I think that's it for communications. Hopefully we will definitely meet again for our next meeting, and that's it. Thanks. Oh, and QID.
Trying to add the Quality Youth Development Steering Committee is up and running. We've brainstormed for each of those 10 benchmarks people we'd like to hit up to lead, areas where we think we are meeting or resources in our communities that are supporting each of those benchmarks to the extent we knew them. We are planning a community information meeting on April 17th, where we'll sort of introduce this idea that we're seeking this, and we will have already reached out to those that we think would be really important to help lead those benchmarks. But that would be an opportunity for people to come and hear more about the initiative and invest themselves in one of the benchmarks that they might want to help in either gathering evidence that we're already doing it or thinking about how we'd want to come to do those things in the next 6 to 9 months. So we are underway, and I'm co-chairing that with Shay Andrews, who is a 7th grader from Westford.
Great. Now just one more update on the Voices work, which is that there's another group that is working on the community issues that were identified at the summit that is working separately from this group to make sure that those issues don't just die and that people have a way to gather and convene. And so that's happening parallel to the work that we're doing, but the Voices work is focused on the district and what its needs are while the community is working on those issues that were identified in the summit. Both things are happening, and if anyone is interested, our viewing audience, please just get in touch and we can put you in those groups, in touch with people in those groups.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Two questions. First one, did we have any public sessions for budget presentation to the public? And second, do you have a copy of the flyer that's going to be mailed out to the community?
I do. I have a mock-up of the flyer that didn't have the actual numbers in it, and I didn't want to share it because it would be confusing to have it. It was a mock-up that had the same.
Didn't you send us a more recent?
We have a more recent one that we were waiting for. Is that the final one, Brian, that I can share right now? The one that I just sent, is it signed off on, the budget mailer?
I haven't put my eyes on it, but I feel pretty confident that Ben and I have gone over a lot.
So we'll just make sure, and we'll make sure the board has it, but it is done and on schedule, that the schedule we provided, that Ben gave that update at the last board meeting. It's on track for being out by the end of the month, and all those details are in it, just as we had last year.
The other question, we have been providing information to the community that they can access the budget information on the website, and we'll be doing the informational meeting on the budget after the annual meeting on the 8th.
Okay.
Yeah. And just again, a little further, we all have talked about that next year it's going to look different, and hopefully that we'll start in May with a process that's really going to address the fact that we know we haven't done the engagement that we'd like to do around the budget. And the May meeting is the first attempt to start bringing the community into the why of the framework in the district, moving towards September, and then early October, a community gathering where there hopefully will be a lot of people who are now exposed to and familiar with the framework, and the engagement and then voter turnout for the next year, we're hoping will be significantly different as a result of all of those efforts starting in May.
Thank you for the update.
Sure.
Okay, anything else? All right, does anybody have anything for the agenda for April 2nd that wouldn't already be in our plan?
PLP status?
That will be in our plan.
I just had a question about our final plans with building equity. I accidentally read the last chapter because it was like 5 pages long. So I was just wondering when we're going to wrap up discussing that and what that will center on, because I imagine we can't talk for half an hour on 5 pages. I mean, maybe we could, but...
Well, my plan was that, sorry, we have a phone that was left behind and they're calling it now. So my plan was that after the reading, the last time that we meet to discuss it, we could talk about some action steps, which I think you really are already because of the work that you're doing around the budget. But maybe it would be a more a conversation to get people's input to those meetings. I mean, my original intent when we started it was that we would have some action steps, but we took action steps before the end of the book.
So is that something that is going to be on the agenda next time because it's the first meeting of the month?
I think it probably needs to be, because I think we need to wrap it up before the changeover in the board. Yeah. Oh, yes.
So read 5 pages.
Doesn't need to be on the next agenda by any means, but at some point, could I get some clarification on school resource officers? Which I mentioned because at the select board meeting, they mentioned that they are adding a school or replacing a retiring school resource officer at the high school, and that they anticipate also hiring 2 additional ones, one for the town schools and one for the Junction school area. And I'm not sure if we are participating in partially paying for the additional.
Yeah, so there is we will, we
yeah,
have just met, yes, it's been in the budget, a portion of that school resource officer. And we just met with Essex PD to talk about the more details and to meet the person. So we still have more of that to flush out, I feel like.
Yeah, I remember the first one, but I just wasn't sure about the 2 additional ones.
That.
Yeah.
So the one that was just hired is a replacement. But we put money in next year's budget for a new, right?
Yeah, well, we put money in our budget to support a new full-time SRO that will be a Essex PD officer.
Right.
So we're paying approximately 33%.
Right.
Their plan is to go, actually on the 2nd, and I was gonna bring it to the agenda, is that I met with the chief today, and the chief and the captain would like to come to the next board meeting, introduce that idea, work through some other topics that are of joint interest, and to do that.
That's actually literally perfect, because that's exactly what I wanted to get clarification on, so.
Okay, good.
And the
Okay.
SRO person as well.
Okay.
With this additional school resource officers,
Next meeting, okay.
well, no, I think it's important to understand and also touch upon, is Westford going to be covered by this, or is it going to be just state police?
No, I think, so state police will continue to be a primary responder.
Right.
There is a response agreement with Essex. I think because of what we can leverage our school district's overall relationship with Essex PD, we're creating a really unique and robust offer for Westford. So school resource officer will absolutely spend time there, because those students are going to become Essex High students, and it's about depth of relationship. And we've also got other opportunities where the state police are now joining our monthly public and school safety meeting, as well as the Fairfax Rescue. So I think we've gone a long way at unifying our work with our public safety people. That will include Westford now.
But we will talk about all of that at the next.
Yes.
You have something to add to the
April-
agenda?
April 2nd, PLP status.
Yeah,
okay.
that's already,
Okay.
got that. Laura?
Can we add a presentation about flipped classrooms?
So when is,
We had it on.
so we have a presentation coming up, I'm not sure which April meeting.
I think it's
One
the
of
next
the 2 April meetings is going to talk about instructional strategies. So it will be flipped classrooms and
I'm pretty sure
other-
it's the next one.
It's
in April,
probably the
second
9th, the 16th. Yeah. Anything else for April 2nd? Okay, so message to the community, I think it's the audit. I think it's the student data presentation that Amy did. And I think another piece about the budget, I think we should keep putting the budget in until the budget happens. Okay, anything else? Thank you all. We are adjourned.